Pokemon game has introduced a new set of mechanics that has elevated the overall franchise in some way, some of them changing the game forever. I'm going to be going through some of these and scoring the most significant changes that have happened since Generation 2 all the way up to the modern day. Now, why am I not starting in Gen 1? Well, aside from anything else, Gen 1, the main gimmick there was Pokemon, where it began. You know, there's not a huge amount to go into. And also, there were some real issues with Gen 1. M&J TV did a video not too long ago about some of the mechanics that were in Generation 1 that are long gone, and frankly, they needed to be. They were not great. So I'd go check out that video if you want to hear about those, and after you've finished here, and subscribe whilst you're here. There are a few things that I won't be covering for the most part. I'm not going to talk about any specific moves, so things like the entry hazards or hidden power, or any mechanics that have basically come and gone, such as permanent weather from abilities. There are going to be some notable exceptions to that last one though. There are going to be some things that have come and gone, but we'll get into that later. So let's dive into what we have in Generation 2. I've got 5 things that I think are the biggest changes that occurred in Generation 2 in the Gold, Silver, Crystal games. First one of those is breeding. Now, breeding was the introduction of baby Pokemon as well, so we had some fun little forms like Pichu and Cleffa, who don't need to exist. But it did mean that breeding was now available so that trainers could breed their own Pokemon and create smaller versions that they could trade off to their friends so that they complete their decks a little bit easier, rather than having to one person catch an Oddish and then having to catch a Bellsprout, having to trade them both over, and then having to catch multiple so that you could get the whole evolutionary chain. Instead, you could just breed whatever you wanted, particularly with the starters, which were very difficult to get outside of it. You could just get yourself a handy Ditto found just outside Goldenrod City, and then you could trade over and create an army of your favourite Pokemon. In the competitive scene, breeding has now meant that we could get exactly what we wanted to, including natures, which in this generation didn't exist, and egg moves, which meant you had a whole bunch of other options. Breeding is a mechanic that I very much take advantage of, and I still do it to this day, particularly when I want to get that very specific team build and I want to have a certain team for a playthrough, which is something I quite enjoy doing. I'm only going to give breeding 4 stars though, because there are some weird egg groups that just don't make sense, that mean that some Pokemon can't breed with others, or some can, that don't make sense. And then there's just some Pokemon can't breed at all. Legendaries I kind of get, but just some others that just can't. It's a bit odd. Next up is the introduction of items, and particularly not just general items, but held items, which meant that players had a huge possibility for whatever they wanted to do. There weren't that many items added back then, but they were pretty defining at the time. Probably one of the most significant items was the leftovers, and items that boosted particular types, like the charcoal, the mystic water, things like the scope lens that boosted your critical hit, and those that worked out for certain Pokemon, like the Thick Club for Marowak and the Lucky Punch for Chansey, which just made them much more usable in playthroughs and competitive play. This also opened up the side benefit of being able to do trade evolutions with very particular items, which could be seen as a restriction. Having to get Seadra into Kingdra with a Dragon Scale, and having to get a Metal Claw, or having to get a Metal Coat for an Onix to make it a Steelix, can be annoying. It gave a boost to certain Pokemon though, and a reasoning for their non-existence in the previous generation. Adding these items in has been phenomenal and easy 5 stars. Speaking of Steelix, that reminds me, in Gold and Silver we were introduced to the Dark and Steel types, which were very notable for Pokemon such as Umbreon, Tyranitar, Magneton, Skarmory, Fortress. These additions added a whole other layer of complexity to the game, and more checks for Psychic types. In addition to these type additions, there were changes made to the type chart overall. So in Red, Blue and Yellow, Bug, Fire didn't resist Ice, Bug and Poison were super effective against each other, and Psychic was immune because of a glitch to Ghost types. Nowadays that's not the case, and Ghost is now super effective against Psychic, which is how it should have always been. The new types are always fun to add in, and it gave a whole bunch of other options for Pokemon, some pretty interesting typings later on, so 5 stars for adding in Steel and Dark types. Another very battle-specific change was the split in the special stat, as it was in Gen 1, to become Special Attack and Special Defense. It meant that Pokemon such as Snorlax, which had a special stat of 65, therefore got a special attack of 65 and now a special defense of 110, meant that it was so much better for bulking out against particular Pokemon. Or Alakazam, who had a special stat of 135, was ridiculous for attack and bulk. You now know how frail Alakazam is, as it dropped its special defense down to 85, so it's much more of a glass cannon. So 5 stars for that change Pokemon. Good job. Finally, in Gen 2, we have shiny Pokemon, or different coloured Pokemon, which were characterised by the red Gyarados. As you probably know, shiny Pokemon are no different to regular Pokemon. Some of them are really noticeable, like Gyarados going from blue to red, which was explained as the forced evolution of a Magikarp, but others, not so good. Looking at you, Garchomp. Shiny Pokemon are rare, and they don't really offer anything else other than just being able to flex on your opponent, or if you've got a particular challenge to complete a shiny deck. So I'm going to give shiny Pokemon 2.5 stars. I don't really care about a shiny unless I just happen to find one, or if I'm playing a game where capturing one just makes a difference, like the quest in Pokemon Legends Arceus. Head to Hoenn and to Generation 3, which introduced two things that have forever changed the game. Natures and abilities. Each Pokemon has both of these, with natures affecting a Pokemon's stats, usually increasing one by 10% and decreasing another by 10, and abilities giving each Pokemon a trait which affects them in some way or another. In some cases, it's a balancing act or a gimmick, such as Truon for slacking, making the insane stats of this massive ape much less of a threat, or Wonderguard for Shedinja, making it somewhat usable, despite its fragility. Other abilities, such as Pick Up or Stench, give the player the chance to use items or influence the Pokemon around them. Although some don't make that much sense. Huge Power on Azumarill is very bizarre for a mixed attacker with a special typing. Abilities get a 5-star score, but natures I'm only giving 3. Most of the time during the playthrough, it's kind of annoying to get the nature that you want since they're randomly determined. Unless, of course, you are in the later generations where you can just use the mints to change them. They got a little rarer in the earlier days. But we've all had the excitement of finding the Pokemon that you want, only to find that it has the nature that lowers the stat that you wanted. Bummer. This next one is probably the biggest change made in all of Pokemon, the physical special split. Prior to Gen 4, every water, fire, grass, psychic, dark, electric, ice, and dragon type was considered special, whilst the rest were physical. That meant that Pokemon such as Gengar finally got stab moves that they were able to use effectively. It also meant that Pokemon like Sharpedo, Salamence, and Weavile were able to take advantage of their higher physical attack. Downside of that is that Hidden Power became a special move only, which meant regardless of its type, some of the physical attackers lost their coverage. The physical special split was a change that was absolutely necessary because it made some moves just finally make sense. It seemed ridiculous to current day me that Leaf Blade and Bite were somehow considered special, even though they clearly had some form of physical contact, or that Shadow Ball was somehow a physical move, even though it was just a big old ball of goo that was hucked at you. Regardless, the physical special split gets a 5-star diamond rating. Clearly the best change the Pokemon has ever made. We're going to hop over Gen 5 because, cute as Oshawott is, the main gimmick in Black and White was the introduction of a whole new region and Pokedex 14 years after the game, giving a full soft reset for new trainers coming in. So there wasn't really much going on. In battle, the biggest change was the permanent weather, which I mentioned earlier, and that didn't stick, so bother help! Let's go on to Generation 6. Happened in the Kalos region. The first was the introduction of the Fairy type. As it's stated in the game, it turns the entire type matchup system on its head, with resistances to dark and fighting type moves, immunity to dragon, and a weakness to the uncommon poison and steel type moves. The fairy type became a staple in competitive teams. Fairy types were also really good offensively because they were super effective against dark, fighting, and dragon types, whilst resisted only by poison, steel, and fire types, which meant you could add a great offensive type onto Pokemon such as Azumarill and Gardevoir, and could deal out absolutely massive damage. So, as with Dark and Steel, 5 stars for the introduction of fairies. And we also got our first fairy legendary in Xerneas here. But the biggest thing that was introduced in Generation 6 was Mega Evolution. Mega Evolution is one of the Pokemon community's absolute favourite gimmicks, and the fact that it stayed in both the Alola, Let's Go games, and it's coming back in Legends Z8 is a testament to that effect. As a concept, Mega Evolution gets a 5-star rating, but for me, the execution is not really good enough. Here is a list of all of the Mega Pokemon that were introduced in X and Y, along with the 20 others that appeared in Oras, as well as the primal forms of Groudon and Kyogre. These Mega Evolutions effectively added about 100 points to their base stat total, and often gave them a new ability or a different type that could really affect your strategy. However, you can only do it once per battle, so having a full team of Mega Evolving Pokemon, I did at one point, would not necessarily work out for you. Some of these Pokemon absolutely benefit from a Mega, like Beedrill, Slowbro, and Camerupt, but why do they give one to the pseudo-legendaries? Garchomp, Metagross, and Salamence are a big enough threat on their own. They didn't need another 100 base stat points. And Mewtwo. Why did Mewtwo get 2 of them? Well, Latios and Latias effectively get 1 between the 2 of them. Rayquaza is perhaps the most disgusting example of it because it doesn't need a Mega Stone, it only needs to know Dragon Ascent, so it could still have an item and Mega Evolve and ruin your day. I kind of wish they'd stuck with underused Pokemon to get Megas and actually made them viable in the game. It's really weird how few trainers could use Mega Evolution against you, so I'm hoping more will happen in Legends ZA and we see more Mega Pokemon attacking you. Now we go to Alola and we see that this is kind of a turning point where the battle mechanism seems to be the thing that goes forward. In this instance, it was Z moves. Powered by Z crystals, they allow the user to fire off a massively powerful attack only once per battle, but they had greater effects, so doubling the base power of moves like Thunderbolt and adding another effect to status moves. Honestly, Z moves are kind of dumb. Aside from a few Pokemon that get very specific moves that trigger if you have the right crystal and the right move, like Pikachu, the Z moves are pretty generic, and they're only used by the last Pokemon in the battle for a quick one-hit KO move. They're generally pretty forgettable, and I'm kind of fine that they've just gone. The idea of a super powerful move is pretty cool, but I've done a playthrough or two where I just didn't use them, so 1 star for Z moves. On to the Galar region now, and the introduction of Dynamax, a condition where Pokemon could gain a massive 50% HP boost and some monstrously powerful moves for 3 turns, or until the user switches out. The HP boost increases as you give a Pokemon more Dynamax levels, so it can make some very tanky Pokemon, and it seems to be an attempt to compromise between the relatively insane buffs of a Mega Evolution and the power of a Z move, with every move type getting a particular benefit, like setting up the weather, one of the terrains, or boosting a stat. Gigantamax was a very particular type of Dynamax for certain Pokemon to get a different form, much like Mega Evolution, but aside from giving it a special move for a certain type, Gigantamax isn't that interesting. The Pokemon returns to normal after the Dynamax is over, and it's just another one which has a fun concept, but the execution is just lacking. And the fact that Dynamax was limited to just 2 of the 5 mainline games that were released in Generation 8 suggests that it wasn't that much of a hit with fans. 3 stars for Dynamax, but just 2 for Gigantamax. Finally, we get to the modern day and the Paldea region, where Terastallization is the new battle mechanic brought in Scarlet and Violet. Similar to Z moves and Mega Evolution, this can only be used once per battle, but when activated, it creates a large jeweled hat and luster around the Pokemon. Like Mega Evolution, that luster hangs around until the Pokemon faints or the battle is over. Now, every Pokemon in the Paldea region can Terastallize, and the type that it turns into is dependent on its Terra type. These are not specific to breeding, so you could get different Terra types, with generally the one you'll find in the wild, or if you hatch a Pokemon being one of its 2 types that it will already have. Or if you want to change the Terra type, you could just get 50 Terra Shards, give them to the chef in the Medallia gym after you've beaten Larry, and just shove them into the Pokemon to make it a different Terra type. There are some wild Terra Pokemon meandering around the Paldea region, and you can catch those, but will have their own special aura and a particular Terastallization type, which is pretty cool. You can find some fun little ones, like an Ice-type Weasel that's wandering around. And one of the things that's most annoying about Terastallization is you have to recharge your Terra Orb at a Pokemon Center or by touching a Terra Den. There are some exceptions, like in the Pokemon League, you can just Terastallize freely. You can do it once per battle against the Elite Four. But it is a bit of a pain to have to return to a Pokemon Center every time to heal up. The downsides, however, are outweighed by some of the boosts that you get from using the mechanic. When a Pokemon Terastallizes, it changes its entire type to become a single pure type matching its Terra type. With this, its moves get a boost. If the Pokemon is no longer one of its original types, the moves that it has will still get Stab of 1.5 times boosting power, but it'll also give moves that match their new Terra type a bonus of Stab as well. However, if you Terastallize into a type that is the same as one of its original types, let's say you had Torchic, you Terastallize it into a Fire type, its Fire type moves will get ×2. One of the other bonuses that I did not realize until I was researching this video is that if you use a move that is matching your Terra type whilst Terastallized, that has a base power less than 60, it will boost that base power to 60, with a few exceptions. Alongside the Terastallization phenomenon we found in the post-game of the DLC, spoiler alert, but it's been out for over a year now, so if you haven't found out by this point, sorry, is something called the Stellar type. This is a 19th type that Pokemon have if you're going through the depths of Area 0. The Stellar Terra type doesn't change a Pokemon's weaknesses or resistances, but it does give a 1-time per type per battle boost to moves in a standard battle, and constantly gives that bonus when you're in a Terra raid. When you use this Terra type, Terra Blast is always super effective against a Terastallized Pokemon, but it does weaken the user's attack and special attack. The Stellar type is an interesting gimmick, but I feel like you end up losing a really solid bonus to particular moves just to get a one-off coverage. Is effectively having 4 Z moves if you're not in a raid battle. So my thoughts on Terastallization. I think it looks dumb. I really wish the graphic design was more interesting than just a funny hat and a shimmery coating over a Pokemon. Mechanically, it's incredibly useful. Getting that 3rd type for stat bonuses is great fun, and it helps certain Pokemon avoid their weaknesses. People have demonstrated the power of things like Shedinja with heavy-duty boots and the electric Terra type, meaning it basically has no weaknesses. Can be really interesting. I give Terastallization 4 stars. It's a really cool idea, and it really does throw some battles out the window. I just wish it looked better, and overall, the starter type gets 2 stars. It's bland by comparison and frankly didn't need to exist. So that's it. That's my thoughts on all of the major gimmicks that have occurred in the Pokemon games in the last 30 odd years. Let me know down in the comments below which have been your favourites, which ones you would like to see getting improved, any new ones you would like to see coming up in any future games, and yeah, just let me know what you think. Subscribe if you haven't already, as I said earlier, and see you again soon. Bye everyone.